Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the third session of the summer term 2024 of SunoikisisDC Digital Classics and Byzantine Studies. The topic of today's session is, couldn't be any Byzantine if we wanted. It's Suda Online and Digital Suda projects, and it will be presented by our colleagues Monica Berti from the University of Leipzig and Gabriel Bodard from the University of London. And as usual, if you're watching live, please say hi and tell us where you are watching from. Before starting to talk about digital Suda and the Suda Online, perhaps a very quick introduction to the Suda per se might be interesting, as we are talking about pretty much the most Byzantine thing and lexicon that we have. Let me share my screen 1 second. So do you see the slide? Yes. So just a very quick introduction. I think that Monica and Gabriel are going to say something more about that later. And we are in Byzantium. We are in the Byzantine Empire. Suda is one of the most important Byzantine encyclopedic lexicon, which is written in Greek, very important, and which has some 30,000 entries. And why it is so relevant for Byzantine and classics students and scholars, because most of these entries draw from ancient sources that we don't have anymore today, and very often they are derived from classical sources, but also medieval Christian. Medieval meaning also, Eastern medieval Byzantine Christian writers and compilers. The Suda is like between a grammatical dictionary, because it is also the lemmata are in alphabetical order, and also an encyclopedia in the current sense of the word. So it explains, for example, both the source, the derivation, the meaning of words. So what we would have in a dictionary, of course, according to the philological and linguistic study of the period, but also gives like lengthy explanations to entries, for example, difficult grammatical forms, rare words, or proverbs, for example, or gives lengthy biographical notes on persons, or explanation on places, institutions, and also philosophical concepts, such as, for example, physis or cosmos. So we are once again between a dictionary and a big encyclopedia, and all of this is done once again drawing on ancient sources. Yes, the material commented on, so let's say the lemmata that we have are primarily ancient or biblical, and medieval and Byzantine data are not that present. It is once again, I will stress this once more, it is based on ancient sources, but also not only sources meaning historiographic or let's say literary sources, but also and foremost on lexica and etymologica. And this draws a very nice bridge to a session that we will have later in the semester, where our colleagues from the Etymologica project are going to talk about the digital edition of the Etymologicum Gudianum, which ties very nicely to today's session. Again, we also have excerpts from Constantine VII, Porphyrogenitus, or Scholia to Homer, or Stophanes, you name it. The interesting thing about the Suda is that unlike other lexica which were born in the same scholarly and learned context in Byzantium, such as for example, the lexicon of Photios, it became extremely popular, and it is preserved in a lot of manuscripts. I don't have in this moment the number at hand, and also in thousands of excerpts, and it was also used extensively in the scholarly works up until the late 16th century. A very I've talked I've talked a lot about the Suda, but I never said when it was composed, also because it is not certain. We don't know who composed it, and I mean, we have an idea of when it was composed, which has to be before the 12th century, and most probably in the second half of the 10th century, because in one of the lemata, there's the mention of the death of Emperor John I Themiskis and his succession by Basil II and Constantine VIII. However, it is not sure that this is not an interpolation. So let's stick to second half of the 10th century until the and before the 12th century. So I think I've talked way more than I should have, but I think that's the most important thing to keep in mind is that, we're talking about an extremely important source of Byzantine, Christian, and classical texts. So the Suda is extremely relevant to everyone who is working on and in these fields, and that's why it is extremely important to make it available to as many people as possible. And on this note, I think I would pass on to Gabby.
Great, thanks, Martina. So we're going to divide what we're talking about now between a set of projects that started around 25 years ago and a few projects that followed that, which I'm going to introduce briefly under the topic First Steps, and then Monica's going to talk about some more recent projects taking work on digital editions of the Suda in a slightly different direction. So in terms of the first steps, we're talking primarily about this project, the Suda Online, or SOL. So here's a timeline of the projects that I'm going to be talking about, really mostly about the Suda, but with a little bit about its successors and things that have been inspired by it. And then, as I say, I'll hand over to Monica for the current state of the art in this area. So the first thing to say about the Suda Online, which is the first of these projects, is that this project was really quite cutting edge in all sorts of ways, and I'll explain many of these ways in my description of what this project is and where it came from. The context really is that the Suda, which exists in several medieval manuscripts, has been edited by modern scholars, and the most recent edition is this edition from the 1930s by Adler. And up until this point in 1998, when we started having this conversation, the only way you could get hold of this was in the Greek edition in 5 volumes, published by Teubner. Very, very good, very high quality, scholarly, edited and revised edition in ancient Greek. So at some point on the classics mailing list, which was widely used, has over hundreds of people on it, lots of discussion about things. Someone asked the question, where can I find an English version of the Suda? Because, as Martina was saying, lots of the material in the Suda is really important, as it's the only material available on the only source of some of this material. And it's of great interest to classicists, to biblical scholars, to medievalists. etc. And so, of course, they asked this question: where can I find a translation of the Suda in English or parts of it? And the simple answer was you can't. There are very small parts of the Suda might have been translated into English here and there, but the bulk of it has never been translated and probably never will be, because it's pretty hard to imagine a project of that size being done by any one person and published on paper by a traditional publisher of such an obscure text where the majority of the content is, to most readers, not all that exciting. There are dozens and dozens and dozens of entries that simply say, the head word followed by this is a proper name, and then the next entry. Right. So the content is just not quite exciting enough that you can imagine a publisher commissioning and publishing this massive, again, 5-volume in the ancient Greek translation. So this conversation came up in about 1998, and people started saying, well, couldn't we do it digitally? Wouldn't that be a way of doing it collaboratively? There could be no limit to the number of people who would do it, and we could collectively translate it. Each person could do a few entries. We could ask students involved, those people who teach Greek, could get advanced students involved in helping translate and so forth. And we didn't have the word at the time because the concept hadn't been invented. But what we were basically talking about was crowdsourcing. Okay, we were going to put the text up in Greek, and there are 30,000 entries, and we were going to put the Greek text up, and over time we were going to allow people to create editions. And so the infrastructure was made available by Ross Scaife, who was the director of the Suda collaborative, the STOA collaborative, which was this website at stoa.org, which still exists in a sort of snapshot state since Ross's death in 2008. But at the time was doing all sorts of quite experimental and cutting edge projects, digital projects, the sorts of projects that would not have been possible on paper. And so he set up this infrastructure, and a bunch of people got together, including several programmers, computer science professor, and several classicists, to start editing this resource. And what would it look like? The TLG generously gave their copy of the text to the STOA to post online for free, and that the work of translating this and then vetting those translations started. Bear in mind, just in passing, that this was before Wikipedia existed, and this was before Galaxy Zoo had come along and really transformed the way crowdsourcing works. These are massive projects that only exist because thousands upon thousands upon thousands of people are willing to contribute to them, to contribute tiny amounts of their labor, their work, their expertise, and get things done through that. And I'll talk a little bit more about crowdsourcing at the end of my part of this presentation. So the translation of the Suda Online, which is quickly branded SOL, Suda Online, which was a very pleasing pun because it also spells out the Latin word for sol, which is the word for sun. Hence the logo up there in the top left of the screen. This is basically the web design that was created in 1998 or very shortly after. If it looks a little bit like a 1990s website, it is. But the infrastructure was very, very simple. If you wanted to log in, you had to first be approved by the editors as a translator, which meant you had to write to them and say, I have the following credentials in ancient Greek and I would like to do some translating. And so long as your credentials were in some sense realistic, you had some sort of university affiliation or university background, they would approve you to edit. You could start editing, and as soon as you added your translation, the translation was visible to everyone, and it would then later be vetted. There was an army of people vetting translations, and vetting a translation effectively meant that they would check your Greek, they would potentially improve your English, they would check that you'd understood what was going on. They might add extra notes or other commentary for clarification, bibliographical references, which are all things that translators are able to add to their translated entries. And then they would change the flag on it saying this has been looked at least once. So there'd be various settings, and I forget the exact terms they used, but the settings were no one's looked at this yet. This has been looked at least once. This has been looked at and significantly improved, and this is as good as it can be, and is considered sort of finished, ready. And the entries sort of went up the sort of scale for each of those steps, which was really important to be able to see those flags, given that your first entry, which might have been done by a graduate student who didn't yet have, or an undergraduate student for that matter, who wasn't completely flawless in their understanding of Greek, might produce an imperfect translation that had not yet been vetted by anyone. And seeing that it's been vetted by someone at least once gives you confidence at least that that hasn't happened, that any basic errors that might have crept into the translation have been fixed at some point. So there was this level of vetting for at that level. And as I say, there were lots and lots of people started getting involved in this. People were really excited about this. Many more people than we would have expected got involved, given that we're talking about translating some medieval Greek into English. You could well imagine half a dozen people gradually doing this work over the next 50 years. But so many people got involved. They got their students involved. They did various amounts of not just initial translating, and not just initial translating of the exciting entries, but also of the boring entries in there as well. I mean, nothing's boring to everyone, but you understand what I mean by exciting and less exciting entries. And also many people involved in vetting and in improving the interface and improving the security of the interface and improving the functionality of the kinds of search that you can do, the kinds of display that you can get, the different kinds of metadata that you can add to a record, such that by 2014, all 30,000 entries had been translated and vetted at least once. That's a phenomenally fast progress and a phenomenally exciting result. It's fair to say that in the previous 10 years after that, the successive 10 years after that, people have continued to work on it, continued to vet entries, improve entries, add further metadata and references and so forth to the translations. And it's an even better resource now than it was 10 years ago, when we had this milestone of being able to say that we have completely translated it. This work has continued, and work continues now, and I think it's really important to note that this is not finished. And although this massive milestone has been reached, it's not the end of the journey towards having a translation of the Suda. Our understanding of this text also evolves, and people might have made further discoveries about the text, or further suppositions about the text, emendations and so forth, that can then be later incorporated into these translations at a later date. So this continues to work forward. Probably not with the same level of speed and the same sort of mass excitement as was happening in the late 90s and early 2000s, when there was all these records, some untranslated. You could go and you could put your name on this. You could be the first person to have translated this ever. And even if you didn't do a great job and several other people vetted your translation, afterwards your name would still be at the top of that list of people who are involved in that translation. This sort of straw man graduate student who translated something and maybe didn't do a great job, but nevertheless it was still useful because others vetted it, and you ended up with this excellent entry as a result, is not an entirely fictional character. I'm actually describing at least one of the entries that I vetted, and one of the earliest entries that I vetted. I was a graduate student when this project started in 1998. I got quite excited and translated several entries. At least one of them, I can see from the number of people who vetted it, I didn't do a great job, but I think it was still useful to have done this, and I hope the people who vetted it think so too. But thanks to that vetting, and I've also been back and added more to it in the past. It's a pretty good entry in there now with lots of data and metadata and translations and notes and so forth. And I'm sure if that happened to me, I'm sure that happened to various other people as well. So it's really a collaborative. Every single entry in there is a collaborative effort, because there's at least one translator and at least one vetter of that translation. As I say, when there were lots of untranslated entries that people could go in and add to, there was quite a lot of excitement about this. You could go in, you could give your students something that they didn't have any translation to check it against, and so forth. Once all 30,000 had been entered, there was a sense in which this was maybe slightly less exciting. And so people started thinking about, well, what other ancient texts do we have of this kind that we could collaboratively translate in this way? There are a few resources that came up inspired by the Suda that I want to just mention in passing. The first of these, chronologically, is this tool. This is not a resource, not a website or a project in its own right, but this is a tool which can be used on various different projects, which is called SOSOL, the son of Suda Online. Its name explicitly refers back to Suda Online, as you can see, it's the son of Suda Online, and this is designed to be a collaborative editing tool for editing, adding, creating, and amending editions of papyri, or of other kinds of editions of ancient texts. It's used in other places, but it was originally designed by this papyri.info project, and it's deployed on the papyri.info website. If you go to papyri.info and you click on edit or contribute to, you will find this page on the son of Suda. And if you log in, you can go and you can edit their typological entries. This isn't software that is based in any technical sense on the Suda Online, but it's very much inspired by the ethos behind it, is very much that of the Suda Online. That's why it's named as it is, in explicit recognition of that. A more direct successor is this project and a couple of projects, the Harpocration Online and the Photios Online projects, which, as you can see, look very similar. They have very similar, they have the same underlying software underneath them. This, again, doesn't use the software of the Suda Online, nor does it use the SOSOL tool, but it uses a very, very low-tech, very fast to deploy and very easily redeployable piece of software designed specifically for this project by Ryan Borman at Duke University. This project was devised by Josh Sozin at Duke University to add a couple of other ancient, encyclopedic style texts. Harpocration in one case, which has some 1,200 rather entries, and then Photios, which has about 16,000 entries, so both smaller than the Suda, and to start getting those collaboratively translated. The Harpocration was completely translated, at least in the first pass, largely by a group of collaborators and a lot of Sozin students, and then the Photios project is maybe about a quarter of the way through, and has been worked on much more recently in the last few years. And all of those can be read online. They don't have quite as rich sort of search functionality or metadata as the Suda Online, and very little by way of notes and bibliography. But as a first pass translation, this is absolutely invaluable work for someone who wants to use the encyclopedias but doesn't necessarily have the confidence to read the ancient Greek themselves. The last project I want to mention that's done some work on this, and this sort of leads a little bit into what Monica's going to talk about, is this project called Topos Text, which is a project that takes various ancient texts and disambiguates or does entity recognition on personal names in those texts, personal names and place names and other kinds of named entities in those texts. And there's one page in the Topos Text site which has many, many texts, and this is a phenomenal work. And there was a Sunoikisis session on this a couple of years ago, which you can find, and you should find if you're interested in this and watch. There's one page in this for the Suda encyclopedia, which has not every entry in the Suda, but every entry that they identified as being about or mentioning a named entity, so a person primarily, but also I think places and similar, and disambiguates that with a reference to another authority. In many cases, that authority is Wikidata. That doesn't necessarily mean that you'll find a Wikipedia page there, but you will find some data in Wikidata. There are also some references to places like Trismegistos and other places for those references. But primarily, if you click on this link here, so it's the translation that we have here, the English translation taken from the Suda Online. If you click on the name Abaris, which is turned into a hyperlink, that will take you to the Wikidata page for this particular individual called Abaris, which may or may not have more information about him, but at the very least will disambiguate that this is a particular Abaris that is being talked about. So that's a really important work that's been done by Topos Text, and that again, it starts to feed into the sort of work that Monica is going to be telling us about in a minute. And the last thing I want to just talk about is that we've talked about the concept of crowdsourcing. And I just wanted to say a few words about that to sort of put that in some context. Crowdsourcing is something which has very much become a very commonly talked about issue, especially in academic work in digital humanities. And there have been some massive projects that work on this that have appeared since the Suda Online was first devised. And the two largest such projects are Wikipedia, which, as you know, has millions and millions of individual pages and tens of millions of editors, people who edit millions of times a day, and things are freely available, and immediately you've edited something, almost any page on Wikipedia, I say almost any page because there are a few pages that are locked for various reasons, but almost any page, you or I could go in there right now without even logging in and edit the page in any way we want. Most likely you or I would be responsible about this, and we would edit it only if we felt we were improving it. If we decided to go in and vandalize it, which none of us would, but some people would, as we know, the internet is full of bad actors as well as responsible people. It's almost guaranteed that someone else of these millions of editors would notice and fix it very quickly, and quite probably ban, eventually end up banning the person who went in there and vandalized it, and blocking their IP address and things like this. So it really is large enough to be a self-sustaining and self-correcting community. The other massive crowdsourcing project is Galaxy Zoo. This is a very different kind of crowdsourcing project. This is a project where your contributions aren't immediately visible, and the control against bad actors is the fact that each piece of information that they're asking for is edited, is contributed by potentially several people, and therefore if there's one outlier, that's likely to be either a mistake or vandalism, and it can be ignored. So the first instance of this, which is why the word galaxy is in its name, is that we have millions upon millions, probably billions of photographs of individual galaxies taken by space telescopes. And there hasn't been time for astronomers to categorize these and to look at each individual image and analyze them and give information about them. But what they can do is they can separate out these images into individual files, and they can give non-expert members of the public, people again like you and I, a brief typology of galaxies, and they can say for each image, what kind of galaxy are you seeing here? And we can probably do that sort of work. We're not expert astronomers, most of us, but we can do that sort of work. We can look at this. We can say, okay, that's I don't know what types of galaxies there are, but this is a spiral galaxy. This is a something else galaxy. And even if we only get it right 90% of the time, the fact that they're asking several people to do each one, we're self-controlling. You end up getting a vote in there. And there's many other projects do similar things to the original Galaxy project, including several classics-related projects. There's been one project, Ancient Lights, where you ask people to identify individual characters on a photograph of a Greek papyrus, for example. And it's very similar in principle to the Galaxy issue. Crowdsourcing relies in many ways on something that is sometimes referred to as the wisdom of the crowd, and I like to think of this as being like the ask the audience feature in a television quiz show, right? If you don't know the answer to something, you ask the audience. The odds are that if 80% of the audience think the answer is A, then they're probably right, and the 20% are people who just didn't know, right? And people who don't know, don't press any of the buttons, so you get a more informed sort of response. So that works for certain kinds of tasks, right? So the sorts of tasks that people get that are often sourced out to the crowd in crowdsourcing projects are, broadly speaking, one of the following types of tasks, and there's much more detailed sort of taxonomies of crowdsourcing than this, but this is just a sort of very crude sort of sense. You can ask people to do things that are fairly repetitive tasks that are not easy to do programmatically, and that you don't necessarily need to be an expert to do, but you've just got millions of them that need doing, and so getting lots and lots of people to do a few each is a really efficient way to get that done. And this is the sort of point and click. This is like draw a square around whatever in this image. Read this piece of text that is too messy for OCR to be able to make sense of. Those sorts of tasks. Things like pattern recognition, like the galaxies we were just talking about. The other kind of thing you can ask people to do is things about local knowledge. This is, for example, if you've got loads of maps, including some maps of places from outside of the sort of urban Europe and American sort of regions, and you can say, this place on this map, what's it called now? What was it called in your grandparents' day? These names might change. How do those names spelled? So this is local information that certain people have, that you have about a very small area and a time around your place of origin or your parents' place of origin, and you can add your local knowledge to that. This is the sorts of things like they have sites, people contributing memories of World War I and photographs, family photographs and things like this. There's specialist knowledge. This is things like some of the ones we've been talking about, where a few people in the world have the ability to translate from ancient Greek, and that's the sort of thing that specialists can contribute their knowledge to. You can either have crowdsourcing sites that give very specific instructions and ask people to do things in a certain way, in a certain order, using the following criteria, and including the following metadata. Or you can have a more folksonomic approach, where you say to people, give one or more tags, keywords describing what you see here. And you end up with not a top-down taxonomy of information about these images, but a bottom-up folksonomy, which has lots of variation, lots of inconsistency, but at a large enough scale becomes valuable in its own right as a way of categorizing, for example, a collection of millions and millions of open access images on a site like Flickr. And so these are the different kinds of things that, and you can sort of, I just wanted to give that sort of broad sort of context as a view of the sorts of things that you, within which the work on the Suda Online and its successors sort of sits, and how it fits within that. But I got a little bit too excited about that last topic. I'll hand over to Monica now to talk about the more cutting edge work that's being done with Suda.
Okay, Gabby, thank you very much. So okay. here it is. So we have seen, so Gabby, thank you very much for this overview of the Suda Online project, and then in general this discussion about crowdsourcing. And definitely we can consider the Suda Online as a successful scholarly sourced effort, in the sense that the project was able to gather scholars, distributed scholars, who produced these translations. And if we consider that the project was born now, 20 years ago, it was and still is a successful project. Of course, in the meantime, other things happened. And we know that in the last 10 years, various projects for adding more sources, more machine-readable sources happened. And so we have, for example, of course, the Perseus Digital Library, Open Greek and Latin, and other projects providing more machine-readable sources, different editions of the same source, and also linguistic annotations, which is the interesting thing. And we know that today we have various projects for linguistic analysis of our historical sources. In this case, we're talking about ancient Greek sources. We also have linguistic annotations for Latin sources and other sources. And the idea now is to use these open, accessible sources to produce linguistic data and to, let's say, to go back from the translation to the text and use this linguistic data for analyzing these sources. Also, in the case of the Suda, we have to say that now, for example, we can access the text of the edition by Ada Adler because the copyright restrictions expired a few years ago, 70 years after the death of the editor, in this case Ada Adler, and in fact this edition is now openly accessible. And for this second part of this Sunoikisis session, let's say the title is Digital Suda and Name Entity Recognition, and I'm going to explain what I mean by that. So the slides. I have a project, yes, so we have now a digital Suda coming soon. Here we have a page from the Becker edition, coming soon because is happening. And this is part of an initiative funded by the Deutsche Forschungsgemeinschaft for linked ancient Greek and Latin, which is a part of what is happening in the community, as I was saying before. So we have now linguistic annotations for our historical sources, by which I mean mainly, okay, the annotation of the morphology, the syntax, but also the semantic. And part of it is, for example, also to analyze proper names of our sources. And in our program, Sunoikis Digital Classics, we have many sessions about linguistic annotations and also about name entity recognition. So the idea in this case is to go back to the Suda, which is certainly a fundamental source of information for philologists and historians, because as Martina was saying at the beginning, the Suda collects references to previous sources about, in general, antiquities, and so is really a fundamental source that historians usually cite for information about, in general, about antiquities, about onomastics, etc. And so the idea is really to try to analyze the language of the Suda using recent data and recent technologies. And in order to show a bit an example, I have chosen here a specific entry of the Suda lexicon. In this case, we have an entry about Eratosthenes of Cyrene, and I'm going to show this specific entry, even if the project is about the entire Suda, to show how we can approach these texts, but also other texts like Harpocration or Photius. And we need a strategy in some way, because of course one idea is to read the text in a traditional way, by reading it sequentially, as written in the book, and then we can annotate the text word by word, following the sequence of the text. And today we also have annotation tools for something like that. We have sessions in Sunoikisis showing how to use these web-based platform for producing annotations. On the other side, we can also try to approach a text like this, well, with a sort of distant reading approach. So try to begin to individuate in a source like this those explicit linguistic elements that can be used to begin to structure the text, because of course now we have the Suda in a machine readable format, but for the machine the content so is not structured. And this is why a technology like name entity recognition can be interesting. In this slide I'm showing an entry of the Suda on the left. I'm using the page of the edition by Adler with the text and the critical apparatus. Today, also the critical apparatus is part of, it's been digitized, so we have the entire text, including the critical apparatus. For the current analysis, the critical apparatus is not considered in the sense that data is not yet extracted from the critical apparatus, but of course is used when we have textual problems and other things. In this slide, you can see on the right a translation of this entry taken from the Suda online, so you can see the translation of the text. But now my goal is not to talk about specifically the content, which is Eratosthenes, but to show that in this entry we have, let's say, certain forms corresponding basically to proper names that are particularly significant, because we have not only the name of Eratosthenes, but also mentions of his, let's say, teachers in some way, Ariston, Lysanias, Callimachus, the poet. We also have the famous comparison between Eratosthenes and Plato. Then we have a reference to the famous pupil of Eratosthenes, Aristophanes of Byzantium. The pupil of Aristophanes was Aristarchus. And then we have, again in red, you can see the name of three other pupils of Eratosthenes, Mnaseas, Menandros, and Aristis. And then we have in green linguistic expressions referring to the scholarly interest of Eratosthenes and other words that are treated in this edition as titles, work titles. In fact, they are printed with a capital letter. And of course, again, if we want to talk about Eratosthenes, I should cite other sources and also the bibliography. But the goal here is to say, okay, in this short text, which is a good example because we have many other similar entries in the Suda, but also a similar language in other ancient sources, we have many words referring to the author, also to the genre and to other elements. But we have definitely interesting proper names, which are quite significant, as you can see, to contextualize, in this example, the figure of Eratosthenes and his scholarly interest. And in fact, here you can see there is, let's say, in this schema, you can see, again, this relationship between the name of Eratosthenes and other forms, mainly constituted by proper names. And we also have, so in red, we have other names of other, let's say, intellectuals with a strong relation with Eratosthenes. In green, we have references to the works of Eratosthenes, and in blue, we have other proper names when we have information about the geographical provenance of Eratosthenes, Cyrene, his geographical, let's say, geographical information about his intellectual activity in Athens and then indirectly in Alexandria, because we have a reference to the Ptolemies, and then we have a reference to the Olympiad as a chronological information about the chronology of Eratosthenes, and then to, let's say, nicknames, Pentatlos, which can be considered a proper name, and then Bema, okay, which is a common noun, but is referred to Eratosthenes. So as you can see, in this short text, in the end, we have many named entities, as they are called today, basically proper names. And this is the reason why, and these proper names are significant again, so they have a meaning in this context for this specific figure, who is Eratosthenes. But of course, if we consider them and other similar entities in the entire text of the Suda, but also in other lexica and in other sources, we see how they could be extracted to begin to structure the text. And then these entities can be used, of course, for further analysis in the text and in an entire corpus for other, let's say, researchers in the field of onomastics, prosopography, but also literature. For example, we have many words here referring to literary genres, etc. And so here the idea is to, as I was saying before, to use a technology like name entity recognition, which is basically a technology used today for identifying in our text proper names. Of course, again, in our program, we have sessions about name entity recognition. You can find them. And today, of course, this technology is used a lot for text in contemporary languages, mainly in English, and then for text of journalistic nature or in medicine, in science. We have less resources for historical languages because we have to consider, of course, that historical languages are difficult. We have to consider that languages like ancient Greek and Latin are highly inflected languages. So first of all, we have to individuate inflected forms in the text and then lemmatize them. And then through lemmata, we can individuate proper names and further disambiguate them. But still, we begin to see results, for example, for Latin, and we have something for Greek. I'm now experimenting with the Python library Spacie for individuating proper names in our text. In this case, I'm showing results through an interface, a web interface, let's say, where we have our entry of the Suda about Eratosthenes. In this case, what we can see that we have single tokens. We have different colors where we have single tokens corresponding to proper names. And these proper names are classified according to generic name entity classes in computational linguistics, basically personal names in violet, yes, per. Then we have locations in orange, in green, a very generic class, other, and then in yellow, derivatives. Of course, we also have another category, class, which is org. Because this is the idea, first of all, to individuate generic classes basically corresponding to personal names and to place names and derivates, and then, of course, we can further disambiguate them. For example, in this context, we can see many personal names. Eratosthenes in ancient Greek, first of all, is a personal name. Then, in this specific context, is a personal name corresponding to Eratosthenes of Cyrene. And this is the same for many other personal names that we have in this text. We also have locations like Athenon, then we have adjectives like Kyrenaios from Cyrene, etc. In green, we have, well, a difficult class in the sense that other, astronomian and katasterigmus, technically they are not proper names because in ancient Greek they are common nouns, but in this text they correspond to a work title, to two forms of the same work, and in fact in the edition they are written with the first capital letter, and in this case, so also work titles can be part of proper names. But I will not talk about titles because it's a difficult task, but still they are part of the goal to individuate name entities in the text. And if we use an output like this, where we have, and now I have the complete automatic extraction of name entities from the Suda, we can use these single tokens corresponding to proper names for various purposes. You can imagine that with these names we can make researches in the field of onomastics, prosopography, historical geography, or, for example, to research names of authors and works cited in the Suda. And definitely the Suda is a fundamental resource because it's full of quotations of lost works and lost authors. And this is actually my main current research project, so to individuate the language of citations of authors and works, by which I don't mean fragments in the sense of quotations of the text, but names of authors and their works in ancient Greek. And so if we consider an output, the output that I was showing before, we can use those name entities for a further let's say, disambiguation. In this slide, I'm showing again through an interface, an example. Again, we have the same text of the Suda corresponding to the entry about Eratosthenes, where the name entities extracted automatically can be checked, because of course we can still have mistakes in the automatic output. They are lemmatized and they are further disambiguated. What do I mean by that? We can see that in this interface, which is the interface of the web-based platform Inception, which is a web-based platform for semantic annotations. And again, we have sessions in Sunoikisis describing this platform. We can see 3 layers of annotation. We have in gray, we have the lemma. So for each Greek form, we have a lemma. We have the inflected form lusanio, the genitive, and then we have lusanias, the nominative. Then we have in green name entities, which is something extracted automatically. For example, lusanias is a personal name, and I'm here I'm showing this form. And then we have, so in green, we have the two, for example, in this case, we have 2 different name entities, the personal name and loc derive, Kyrenaios, lusanio to Kyrenaio, and then together we can relate to these 2 entities, because these 2 entities, if they are linked, they correspond to a real entity. The real entity in this case is Lusanias from Cyrene, who was, as we can see, a grammarian. And in fact, we have a 3rd layer of annotation, catalog, which is in this case a custom layer for a specific research project, where I use an identifier and where I have an identifier for identifying this grammarian, and I also have a link through a Wikidata item, because Inception can search live the Wikidata knowledge base, and I have an item in Wikidata about Lusanias of Cyrene. So this is, let's say, a focused example on one entry, but this is the idea, to individuate proper names. Of course, as you can see in this context, not every token is annotated, because my research is not about the language of every word, of every token of this text, but is to extract proper names in order to extract proper names, to classify them, and then for my specific interest to individuate within the big category of proper names, author names and work titles. And going on, the output is what? The output can be a catalog of authors and works based on linguistic annotations. I don't have now, not yet, the catalog of the Suda, because this is a project I'm working on, and I'm extracting this linguistic information. I'm going to produce a catalog based on the linguistic annotation of the Suda, but I have a similar work for other works. The Deipnosophist of Athenaeus of Naucratis, as you know, I've been working on the Deipnosophist, and also on the Lexicon of Harpocratium, who was mentioned before by Gabriel, who is another interesting source full of references to authors and works. And as you can see in this case, I have 2 screenshots of these catalogs. They are available online, where we have basically linguistic forms corresponding to our Eratosthenes. They are aggregated using identifiers. Of course, we have specific identifiers, unique identifiers for Eratosthenes of Cyrene, and under this identifier, I have a collection of the linguistic forms used in ancient sources to refer to him, and then other unique identifiers for his works. As you can see, in this case, in Athenaeus and in Harpocration, we have more works than in the Suda. So, of course, definitely we have to consult different sources. And so this is something that shows what we can do. So now, today, in 2024, considering what was done in the last 20-25 years. So we have these scholarly sourced projects. One of the first goals was, first of all, to make the text accessible online. And we have to consider that, for example, in the Suda Online, we still have a beta code. So ancient Greek, of course, is visible also in Unicode, but there is still the text in a beta code, which was the system used 20 years ago. Then we have translations. And today, of course, we can add more information using linguistic data. So this is the aim of a project like this, so to annotate the language for various purposes, as I was saying before. Other purposes why doing something like this, I'm showing again 2 screenshots in this slide. You can see on the left linguistic forms extracted from the Suda and not only from other texts that can be used for different projects, because if I can extract the inflected forms, for example, for the name Eratosthenes, I lemmatize these forms, and through the lemma, I can consult external authority lists like dictionaries like Logeion, the Lexicon of Greek Personal Names, the Perseus Catalog, VIAF, the Virtual International Authority File, Pleiades for the Gazetteer. Then we have also, I can also consult the TLG, Trismegistos, etc. And I can, through the lemma, I can see if such a lemma is present in these external resources, and I can, of course, disambiguate the lemma. On the other side, given that we still need more data for proper names, these linguistic annotations can be used to enrich external resources, like those mentioned on the left of this slide, where we have these icons corresponding to projects for ancient Greek and Latin. On the right, of course, we have another screenshot. Again, these resources are available online, where we can play, for example, with a traditional concordance. This is a digital concordance, where, for example, we can visualize how the name of Eratosthenes is cited in our sources. No, we don't have to do that through indices or other philological resources, but we can jump into the text, and through a concordance, we can, for example, visualize how Eratosthenes is cited. If there are different authors named Eratosthenes, different people, and we can, of course, in this case, research the language of ancient citations, etc. So using linguistic data, of course, as you can see, so the first goal is to produce linguistic data that is useful for many different research outputs in the field of onomastics, historical geography, literature, text reuse, etc. I will conclude this part showing the importance again of a text like the Suda and the importance to have linguistic data from the Suda. And in this case, we have a screenshot from a page of a project that I developed a few years ago, the Digital Fragmenta Historicorum Graecorum, which is the collection of textual fragments of ancient Greek historians, where we have the entire collection of these fragments. But again, through linguistic data, we can also search a resource like the Suda. What I'm showing here in this slide is, of course, is a screenshot, and I can open the resource, and we have also the link here. And if you see in this case, so we can search a form like Eratosthenes in this corpus, and in the results, first of all, in this case, I can get and you can see here below a list. This is a screenshot, of course, the page goes down. I can get a list of the passages of this corpus mentioning Eratosthenes, but in the output, I can also get other results. First, okay, the lemma in Morpheus, which is the parser of the Perseus project, but also I can also find an entry in the Suda, and if I, let's see if I can open, I hope you should be able to see. Okay, in this case, I have the same page. As you can see, if we go down, of course, we can see the text in the corpus where we have this form. And okay, I don't go down because we have many fragments with the form Eratosthenes. But as we can see here, for example, I can try to search this form Eratosthenes in Morpheus. But as we will see, is missing. Is missing why? Because usually proper names are still missing in our digital resources, because many, not only Morpheus, but also other, let's say, resources online, they depend on the digitization of printed resources, including dictionaries, where many proper names are still missing. This is, of course, a problem that we have today. This is why we need to add more proper names for their importance. But I can use the same lemma to search the Suda, and I see that there is one entry in the Suda with the form Eratosthenes, and in fact, through the lemma, in this case, I can jump, because I can interrogate the Suda online, and I can immediately get the result where I have the entry with the translation. You can see that I immediately see the Greek text in a beta code, but of course I can change I can visualize it in Unicode. But this is interesting also for the students, I think, to understand how ancient Greek was represented not so many years ago to be machine readable. And going back to the slide, I also have another example from in this case, again, another entry with another form from the same collection where we have a form like Homeru. So in this case, we visualize the form and inflect the form of the name of Homer, but I can search and inflect the form, but it's possible through this resource to lemmatize live the inflected form Homeru, get the lemma Homeros. I can look it in Morpheus. We have, as you can see, many entries in the Suda with the form Homeros, so not corresponding. So one of them corresponds to the famous poet Homer, but we have many other entries, and they are visualized it. And there is also another resource which is based on the lexicon of the Liddescolt Jones, sorry, the big dictionary, Ancient Greek English, where again I can find the lemma, and then I have different entries, proper nouns and common nouns corresponding to the form Homeros. What I'm trying to show here is that in a corpus where we have linguistic data, we can individuate inflected forms, Homeru. We lemmatize this form, and through the lemma, we can search external resources. External resources can be dictionaries, where, as we can see, in many cases, not in every case, for example, Homer is present in our dictionaries. We can find, of course, a corresponding entry for getting a translation or an explanation, a description, but we should also include other resources like the Suda, which is technically always defined as a lexicon, as a Byzantine lexicon, but the Suda is definitely fundamental because it can be added to dictionaries and other lexica for getting, of course, information about Homer or other entities corresponding to the form Homeros, and so to have information from an ancient source, and then through a project like the Suda Online, a translation into English, and then we can go on. The digital Suda will offer the linguistic analysis and proper names and the catalog of the authors. Okay, so these are examples of the importance of a project like the Suda, not only for the Suda in itself, because which is of course a fundamental source for historians, but because the language and linguistic data from these resources can be used for different purposes. And again, we have the last slide is from another project, the Digital Atheneos project, where we have something similar. Again, I'm using the same form because we started with Eratosthenes, where we have again the form in Morpheus. We can, again, in Morpheus we don't have this form, it should be added. Then we have the Suda entry, and then we also have in this case a name entity digger, in the sense that we can add as a further resource, of course, the use of a linguistic form like this as a name entity, because we know that Eratosthenes is being annotated as a name entity, so we can add these the search of this form in a collection of proper names. So now I know that time is running, and this was my last slide for the digital Suda. So today the idea is, in this long run, so we have seen, so the beginning, making text accessible online, crowdsourcing, and the focus on translations, which is fundamental in terms of accessibility for research, for education in general, for citizens interested. So accessibility, of course, has different meaning. And then today, of course, again, crowdsourcing. So to move to linguistic data in the original language. Of course, these projects are based on, again, a scholarly sourced effort, crowdsourcing, because linguistic data is produced by different scholars in different projects with with different interests. We have linguists, philologists, historians, computational linguists. This is always a constant crowdsourcing effort to produce more linguistic data. So this was my part, and now I stop because I know that our time is running and it's almost over. Yes, so.
So thank you both, Gabby and Monica. I don't know if any of you would like to say something about the exercise that the students are going to take. Would you, Gabby, like to say a couple of words on that and to explain that? Otherwise, I mean, it's quite self-explanatory, but perhaps to guide. I think you're muted.
Yes, I can do. Yeah, sure. Yeah, let me just quickly put my screen up again. So this, for those of you who are coming to this Sunoikis video not via one of our courses, the link to this page, the program page, can be found below the video in the description underneath the video on YouTube. You may need to click on See More to find this link at the bottom of that. And so this page has, the outline of the session, some readings that we've suggested. Most of the resources that we've talked about in this session are linked there. And then we've got a suggested exercise. As I say, specifically for Martina's students, this is probably a required rather than suggested exercise. But those of you who are not following this as part of a taught course, feel free to also have a go at this yourself. The idea of this exercise is to start from the Suda online. This is the resource that I described at the very beginning of this session. You can link through to it from here. And there's two different search interfaces, one for searching in Greek, one for searching in English. Choose whichever one of those you prefer. English is absolutely fine. And you can also browse through some entries and look at multiple different entries and find an entry that is about a person. Quite a lot of entries are, but not every single one. So keep going until you find one that is about a person, and have a look at what the Suda tells us about this person. That is to say, what the Greek text or the translation of it in English, if that's what you're using, tells us about this person. What else does the Suda online tell us about this person? What other annotations or bibliography or references have been added to tell us more about this person? And then look for that same person in some of the other resources we've talked about. Look in the topos text page for Suda, which we've also linked to from here, which disambiguates all named entities in the Suda, or many of them. And see if you can find this entry in the topos text page. And if for some reason it's not there, then go back to the Suda and find another one, obviously that you can find, and have a look in the topos text for that entry and see what how they've disambiguated this. There should be a link which would take you through to Wikidata. What does Wikidata tell us about this person that we didn't already know? What does it not tell us that we did get from the Suda or from the Suda online? Look in Hypocration Photios. Most of Photios is not yet translated, but most of Hypocration is. Does your Suda entry also appear there? Quite a few will. I mean, one of the first few that appear in the entire Suda, Abaris, which is about the third or fourth entry, that appears in all three. And what are the differences between them? What are the differences in the text? And what are the differences in the metadata around that text in the various projects? Can you find, so we've got a link here to the page images of the Suda at the State and University Library of Dresden, and from there you can get the original print edition of the Suda in just page images, not further pars. Can you find your entry in there? How hard it is to find? It's a dictionary, right? So things should be in order. You know how to find things in dictionaries. How hard is it to find? What else can you find on the printed page that you may not have known about just from the digital version, right? What there's an apparatus criticus that is not shown on those page images. There's what is there in the digital editions that the printed page doesn't have? How much of these things had you maybe not realized were added information? And then think finally about what, if you were creating an annotated version of this entry, let's not assume of all 30,000 entries, but just of this one entry that you've chosen. And so you can put anything in it you like. What other information might you add? What other annotations might you add? What other resources would you want to link to? How might you enrich that entry think big, dream in an ideal world. Think about how these things compare, what resources are in which, what information is in which, and what information is missing from which. And what does this tell us about how each of these different versions of entries on the same person in different versions of the same lexicon or in different lexica, what that tells us in how they're understanding what it is they're trying to do as lexica. What do they see as their job? What is their business to be including or not to be including? Everything from the printed pages through to the Wikidata, structured data images, through to the rich metadata you get in the Suda online. How do these things compare? What do those differences tell us about the resources themselves? I think there will be a lot for you to potentially think about, even with just one record, one entry to work from.
This looks like a very promising exercise. That's very, very interesting. So we do still have 15-ish minutes for question, remarks, comments from the audience, or if you would like to add something to what we've been talking about today, feel free to do so. I might just add, anyone yet.
I might just add
so perhaps we can exactly, yeah.
No, I was just going to add one comment in a sort of time travel sort of way. So at the moment, as far as I'm aware, the only people who are right now in April 2024 using this resource as part of an organized class are Martinez students in Cologne. But if you are watching this in the future and you have been set this session to watch, for example, by me, if you're one of my students in 2025 or 2026, I should note that exercise is also obligatory for you. And the sort of the record of that exercise should be to have copious notes on this that you bring to the class, and you can show me and your classmates, or whoever your tutor is and your classmates, some information about your record, and hopefully each person will have chosen a different record. Don't all choose a Bardis from the beginning of the Suda, and really have a think about what what each of you gets out of this, and what that says about what you understand a lexicon to be, or an encyclopedia to be.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much the same process as how the Suda or pretty much any lexicon has been created, right? So just adding notes and taking from other sources. So yeah, we're kind of recreating the past in a way. Perfect. I look forward to receiving many notes then. Yeah. And I mean, I will ask the students, but if they are okay with that, I might also share them with you, Gabby and Monica, so that you can have an idea of what yeah, people think of some lemmata.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I can say that a work like the Suda or similar lexica are interesting because, of course, they should be considered as works in a context, in a historical and literary context. But on the other side, even if maybe they are scary because we have in front of us difficult sources, still, if you look at an entry, you enter a world. You can just read a short text, and then you discover many things. There are so many entries about antiquities. Also, for example, the entry about Eratosthenes. This is about one man, an intellectual. And starting from those few lines, which are rich, full of information, you can then discover a world. So you can just use a single text. And this is what usually happens in scholarship. The Suda is cited like that for specific interests. Cite the Suda. In the Suda, I read that Eratosthenes was born in that period of time, etc. So, but it is interesting because you can really explore a world. So these lexica are super interesting. And in fact, the Suda Online originally, this was one of the goals, to make a text accessible for many different purposes, but also just for curiosities, for entering this fascinating world, even if this is a specific text. And this is the same for Harpocration, Photius. The text, the ancient Greek text, is not available in the online resource because it's still protected by copyright. And in fact, this is the reason why you can see only English translations, and the text is accessible in the TLG. I think we should mention that because in the Harpocration is not and is now out of copyright, and in fact in the Harpocration Online the ancient Greek text is available, but in Photius not, and is a desideratum of the community to get an open access text of Photius, but is still protected by copyright and is in the TLG. So if you go to the Photius Online project, you can see the translation. There is a link to the TLG, and there you have a door. You need a subscription, an institutional or an individual one, and if you have it, you can access the text. I think I should mention that because this is part of the problem that we have today, different levels of accessibility, and we have to consider that. And things will change, of course, copyright restrictions expire, etc. But this is, I know, another topic, but just to understand differences among these projects. Also, the Suda Online originally made an agreement with the TLG. This is why the Greek text is available in the Suda Online since the beginning, because there was an agreement, but we can't download the text. Now, in 2017, I think, the copyright of the Adler edition expired. In Topos Text, we have the English translation, because the goal of Topos Text is to be more accessible, especially for people traveling in Greece. So on your smartphone, you have Topos Text, and while walking or biking in Greece, you can read the Suda, where you can find interesting information about names of gods or descriptions of antiquities, but the text is still in English. And in fact, as Gabby was saying, many name entities are disambiguated in the English. Okay, but still, so it's a wonderful resource. I mean, and through those entities, you can really navigate, because you start with an entry in the Suda, you individuate a name, and then you find information in topos text. Through topos text, with that proper name, you can navigate on a map, and then you can navigate to Wikidata, through Wikidata to Wikipedia, and Wikipedia you find images. So this is, of course, you know how to do that, but so to unlock the Suda, which is a very specific source for historians, but not only, also for bikers in ancient in Greece today, so they can use the Suda for in English translation, unlocking the Suda. I mean,
it's important to know. This is a very, very minor point, followed by a more sensible point, but it's important to note my minor point that neither the text of the Suda nor Hippocration nor Photios are under copyright, right? That the authors of the original text have been dead far more than 70 years or 95 years or whatever. But what the issue, of course, is that there are different licensing agreements over the digitized version of the text. So there are page images available from the Photios online that you can go to, so you can see the Greek, but we can't have the transcription of the Greek that is from the TLG, because they don't have an agreement for that with the TLG, where the texts are under license in the way that the Suda online did, which is the difference there. And I've momentarily forgotten what my more serious point was. I'll come back to it.
A parenthesis while you remember your point, but the copyright is on the editor, the modern editor. This is important. Of course, we don't have copyrights on ancient authors, but editors who have published editions of these sources, of course, had copyrights. Ada Adler, the scholar, of course, published an edition, and only 70 years after her death, the text was accessible, okay, as without copyright restrictions, of course. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, just a very quick remark on what we've been saying, and also for the students and people following. I mean, you see how the topic of our very first session is coming over and over again. I mean, open texts, accessible resources, and this will be pretty much like the fil rouge of the whole semester, because I mean, we we strive pretty much to do everything we do on open texts, on things that are accessible to everybody, without even the door, as Monica called it, of the paid or unpaid subscription to anything. So yeah, that's why perhaps it makes sense to to go back and listen once more to the first session of this semester. It's going to come back a lot of times.
And openness is not only about a paywall. This is, I think, important. This is one part of the problem, but it's also about structured data, because you can have free resources, you can access them for free, but they only, and this is not a criticism, but now they only offer an unstructured text, like also a web page, which is not enough. In our dream, in the future, we would like to have a structured text. Well, this is a dream. Of course, I think it will become a reality in the future. Fortunately, there is a lot of work in front of us and for the future generations. But this is, I think, the double sense of open. The paywall is one component, the business model, and on the other side, also to structure our sources. And this is why now there is a lot of effort also on linguistic analysis. Translations are fundamental for translation alignments. For example, now we have these translations of the Suda, and we can align them for getting more and more results. So it's a long process, and we will have more data in the future.
And we have so much road ahead of us. In particular in the Byzantine studies.
Yes, And yes, and then again, so also to connect disciplines. Okay, so from the perspective of classes, well, at least scholars working on the classical age, those late sources. Okay, well, let's connect. It's always relative. Okay, the concept of chronology, there is always something which is late or early. So it's interesting to see. But again, so I think that the technologies are helping us to talk with other scholars. We know that in principle, but in our experience, we know that these technologies are, of course, helping us to talk more with other disciplines. Of course, we have been always using the Suda, but then it's nice to have, okay, in Sunoikisis we are trying to do that, and this is why we have this semester about Byzantine studies. We have a person who finally help us in leading such a semester, but this is what is happening.
Yeah. Perfect. I'm sorry. I don't see any questions. So if we have something to a very last remark in the last 2 minutes, or never again. Did you remember your more serious point, Gabby?
Not at all.
No. Don't worry, it will come tonight in your sleep.
Yeah, too late. It'll be the minute we hang up this call. Yeah.
Well, you can always add this to the chat, because in YouTube, you know that for our audience, so you can follow this video, but let's say the YouTube chat is there. So if you want, Gabby, you can add your note if this is for a community. There.
By the way, this was my most serious point.
After sleeping, I also forget everything. So.
Oh, perfect. So I think we can call it a day, and I would like to remember the audience that next week on April 29th at the same time, we will have our 4th session on handwritten text recognition from papyrus to codex. So we're going to talk about HTR in Greek papyri and Byzantine manuscript. We will have an incredible parquet of people and colleagues talking. So I really urge you not to miss next week's session. And having said that, I would say thank you and goodbye. See you next week.
Bye.
Bye.